Time being now 11:10, so we're a little bit late, but we'll call this meeting to order. Mr. Casey Griffin, I believe you are with us from the State Board staff. Would you mind calling the roll, please?
Certainly. Commissioner Burns, Commissioner Dixon, Commissioner Gresham, Commissioner Christopher Jones, Commissioner Yolanda Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Rothermel.
Present.
Commissioner Swift.
Present.
Commissioner Vaughn.
Present.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, I'm here.
Madam Chairman, I count 6 members present.
Well, if that's the case, we have a quorum by the skin of our chinny chin chin. Thank you, Mr. Griffin. We are now duly convened. I would like to call on Mr. Nathan James to read our statement of necessity for having an electronic meeting.
Thank you. This is a letter that'll go to Robert Green, who's the Director of Publications Divisions with the Office of Secretary of State. Pursuant to PC 792 of 2020, the Tennessee Commission on Education, Recovery, and Innovation, or ERIC, by and through the State Board of Education, hereby submits this letter as its determination of necessity for its committee meeting held via teleconference at 11:11 a.m. on the 2nd of September 2021. Because a previous in-person meeting of the commission was interrupted by a water main leak in the Cordell Hall building, and because members of the commission reside across the state, it was determined that a physical quorum of the members could not be assembled in Nashville for the purposes of this meeting. As such, ERIC met via teleconference to review and continue its work from a previously interrupted meeting. Statement of necessity for the teleconference was read, and then I'll have a list of the members present. And with that, you are legal, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. James. I'd like to welcome all of our commission members, Vice Chair Vaughn. It's great to see you again. Considering we had that strange, unexpected emergency exit from the last meeting, it's nice we were able to get back together so quickly. Since we met last, 2 weeks ago, Tennessee has experienced a once-in-a-thousand-year flood, the remnants of Hurricane Ida, and the closure of 26 school districts due to COVID-19 outbreaks. It's a lot that's happened in our state in just a short couple weeks. Not to mention the growing number of students who have already reached the level of chronic absence from school, having been out 10 days or more due to COVID quarantine, and they have no virtual school option or other online remediations at this point, although I think we're going to hear some news about that in a little while. Parents are the first and primary, to compound these challenges. Inconsistent, unclear messaging from the state to districts, community members on how to manage the COVID crisis has been really hard to navigate. We all recognize that parents are the first and primary teachers for their children, and parents have the right to choose what the best school environment is for their child or children. School districts should be able to provide a variety of safe options to fit what is best for enrolled students. It's the school's responsibility to further develop a culture of learning and curiosity for their students. And our state needs to provide clear and consistent and proactive direction to our districts at all times, especially in the times of crisis. My children are 5 and 7, and like all other Tennessee students, they started back to school last month. They don't mind putting on a mask because they get to be with their friends, to learn, to grow together, to build memories together. They are the innocents in this horrible pandemic. And the best that we can do as adults is to find ways to support their growth and development while also supporting student social and emotional understanding of these very, very strange times. Some districts have said, some school leaders have said that this is even harder this year than it was last year because of the confusion students are experiencing. But here's the reality. Overall, 71% of Tennessee students, or 7 out of 10 students, are not able to read or write on grade level. Look around. If you see a gaggle of 10 kids, there's a potential chance that 7 of them are not able to read or write at grade level, regardless of their age. What if that was your child? What if it was your grandchild? Start thinking about things differently when you realize that it might be your kid, or it might be your niece or your nephew. Over the past year, thousands of parents of all socioeconomic backgrounds, all races, all cultures, all creeds, have realized just how far behind their child was in reading. I have to tell you, math is not that much better. 74%, or 3 out of 4 students, are not proficient in math. These numbers are so much worse for our more vulnerable populations. The 2021 fall enrollment in colleges and universities will be available in the next couple of weeks. But last year, our community colleges saw a 10% drop and the universities were in the single digits. With these levels of K-12 proficiency, any student attending a Tennessee college or university will need extensive remedial classes and other supports to complete a degree or credential. We have a domino effect in place, and it must be stopped or redirected so that students of Tennessee can be successful and self-sufficient in life. Our students are suffering academically, socially, and emotionally because adults are struggling to get beyond their ideological viewpoints and inspire the children of this great state to learn. Tennessee students of all ages who want to be together, to learn together, to play together, to grow together. Even if you're not a student, we want to be together. We now see the reason for our mission unfold in real time. The amount of devastation that has happened just in the past 2 weeks, inside of the school walls, outside of the school walls, caused by Mother Nature or caused by this horrible virus. Our mission is pretty clear. The Education Recovery and Innovation Commission statute is to form recommendations for Tennessee, kindergarten through to career, to close educational gaps arising from school closures, and to modernize the state's educational structure to create more flexibility in the delivery of education. We created a vision a while back. It states that every Tennessean will have a high-quality education necessary for life and career. It's a lot to take in. A lot has taken place over the past couple of weeks. As you can imagine, like every other meeting, we have a very packed agenda. But I would like to start first by calling on Dr. Sarah Morrison, who's the Executive Director of the State Board of Education, to give an update on school virtual flexibilities. Sarah?
Thank you, Tara. I particularly appreciate just that context setting as you all engage in some really important conversations today. It's a heavy time and it is a hard time. And I know Joey, sitting in the director's seat at one of our districts, leading during this time, feels it. I know at the state board, we feel it. There's just a lot to navigate. So I would love to spend just a couple quick minutes. I know many of you have had questions for Nathan and Tara and want to just kind of lay out sort of what the current options are. Some of that has been evolving over the last week and a half. So we'll give you just a quick overview of what the options are for this school year 21-22 when it comes to either remote or hybrid learning. So the state board worked over the past 6 to 9 months to pass a couple rules to give various options to families, students, and school districts for this year. One of which is to open, if they didn't already have one in operation, a virtual school. That could be a district, that could be a consortium of districts, but to give families who wanted the option to remain fully virtual this school year, that option. We do have a number of districts who have opened virtual schools. The commissioner actually just announced a couple days ago that if districts didn't open a virtual school over the summer and would like to initiate that process, they are reopening that process for districts who would still like to apply for a virtual school this year. We also passed a rule allowing virtual programs, which I think is actually in some ways most relevant to this group. That's a way for students to go up to 50% of their time remote to provide access to courses they might not have access to in their schools, to make sure that our most effective teachers can reach more students across the state. We've seen some really interesting and innovative programs already under the virtual programs sort of umbrella, one of which is AP Access for All that the Nicemonger Foundation has sponsored, really ensuring that all of our districts have access to some really upper level important courses that have not previously been available to many of our students. And then lastly, the board passed a student health rule pertaining to periods of quarantine. So if individual students needed to go into quarantine either because they had a positive COVID test or were exposed to someone with a positive COVID test for a period of 7 to 10 days, they could get remote instruction at the individual level during that period of quarantine. The board also passed a rule last April around the continuous learning plans, which is an option that districts had last year, which was to go fully remote at the district level if a couple conditions were true. If the governor declares a state of emergency that again pertains to schools and the disruption of schools, and the commissioner approves those continuous learning plans for this year, that is something that is still on the table, but not currently being utilized because the state of emergency does not currently extend to the disruption of schools. So as of last Friday, the commissioner has made clear that she will entertain and is entertaining some additional waivers. That's part of her executive authority to be able to waive certain rules and statutes. In this case, it's a state board rule. What she's saying is that she will approve at the classroom or school level waivers for districts who are unable to staff those classrooms or schools due to COVID disruption, or have so many students who are out that it's not that all of those students need to be out on quarantine, but because the vast majority are out, or the vast majority of teachers are out, they're unable to keep those classrooms or schools open. So that allows an additional flexibility for districts via waiver process to allow students at the classroom or school level to be remote, again, for that short period of time, the 7 to 10 days that they might be out for quarantine. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions. This has certainly been an evolving conversation with other state leaders as we try to figure out what are the right options to make available for districts and schools, recognizing that, like Tara said, really the best place for our students is still in schools safely, but we are certainly experiencing some unique situations that have required us to come back to the table a couple different times. So I'll stop there. Any questions about any of that?
I know individual members have certainly raised that issue, and Sarah, we very much appreciate you taking some time to talk about that. One of our members, Dr. Chris Jones, we have two Dr. Joneses now, but surgeon Dr. Chris Jones, that was certainly a big issue that he had contacted us about. I'm not certain whether his surgery schedule is going to allow him to participate in today's meeting, however.
I'm happy to take questions offline as well. Joey's living this day to day, so I'm sure he's got thoughts to share with all of you. But I hope that's helpful. And again, if you have questions, I'll be on for about the next 30 minutes and then have to drop off. But you can chat me or send me a message if you have any questions, certainly.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Appreciate it. Before we move forward, I do want to state also that without any objection, the recording of our previous meeting will serve as the minutes. I'm assuming there's no objection on that. If there is, just holler. With that, pursuant to Section 6 of our commission meetings policy, our workshops are meetings of the commission as a committee of the whole. In accordance with that section and without objection, I move to dissolve the commission into a committee of the whole for the purpose of our workshop. Any objections? Hearing no objections, we are in our workshop. And with that,
Madam Chair, because we are meeting remotely, we will have to do the roll call vote. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Mr. Griffin, would you mind doing the roll call for us, please?
Commissioner Burns, Commissioner Dixon, Commissioner Gresham, Commissioner Gresham, Commissioner Chris Jones, Commissioner Yolanda Jones, Commissioner Rothermel,
Aye.
Commissioner Swift,
Aye.
Commissioner Vaughn,
Aye.
Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman.
Aye. Can you guys hear me?
Commissioner Jones, Yolanda Jones.
Can you hear me?
I can now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Aye. Okay. Commissioner Christopher Jones, Commissioner Gresham,
Even
Chairman,
with
I'll count 5 ayes. currently.
That's
Looks like
that's the minimum number, so you're good.
Yeah, okay. It looks like Commissioner Gresham is, I don't know, she has a circle going around her name, so I'm assuming she's trying to reconnect. Okay, so given that, we are able to move forward with our workshop. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Jennifer Scheiss from Bellwether.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Thumbs up? All right, perfect. I'm glad to be back with you today. That was definitely a first for me, our last adjournment. I've never had a water main break scuttle a workshop, so glad that we were able to find this time back together again. Before we dig into our agenda, I want to introduce a new member of our team whose name you'll see on the screen, Brian Robinson. He has joined us on the Bellwether team, and he's helping us with the analysis of the data for the year one addendum report. So he's going to be primarily listening in the first hour or so today, but you'll see his name and face pop up from time to time. So wanted to make sure to introduce him. We're excited to have him join us and bring his time and talent to this work. Kelly, do you have control of the slides? Thank you. Okay, so we are essentially today focused on what we weren't able to finish when we were last together in Nashville. So we have the same goals. We are aiming to share and discuss feedback on the report outline, and I'll give you a little bit more context and framing on that in just a second, and determine whether there are additional recommendations to add from some of the new topics that were identified in July and that we've sent information around since we were together at Montgomery Bell. So we'll spend pretty much all of our time today working on those two things. We'll have an opportunity to vote towards the end of the meeting. We'll talk through some next steps quickly and aim to adjourn on time. Any questions about our agenda? And I can't see all your faces. So if you have a question, you'll need to speak up. All right, next please, Kelly. Okay, I'm not going to go through all the framing that I went through before, but just to give us just a little bit of grounding in where we are. In today's meeting, obviously we have the same goals. We made it through, I think, one of our substantive discussion items last time, so we have quite a few left. I do want to emphasize that where we are focusing on the discussion today is places where in the feedback that we sought from you in one-on-one conversations and that you shared with us from your stakeholder engagement in the interim, where there's some disagreement or a desire to refine or change some of the previously recommended, adopted recommendations from the July meeting. So you're not going to see the full body of recommendations show up in our conversation today, unless you want to bring up additional things, certainly. We're only talking about the places where we got feedback that there were commissioners who had ideas to substantively change recommendations. So anything where we have existing consensus and don't have indication that we need to change something substantively at this point, those are not part of our conversation today, but they are very much still part of our work. So you'll see all of those reflected in that full outline that we've provided to you now a couple of times. And when we come back to you after this meeting, we'll be bringing you a full draft of the full report, which will include all of that content, and you'll have another opportunity, multiple opportunities to weigh back in on those recommendations. Certainly, if there are items, specific recommendations that we don't discuss today that you want to provide some specific feedback on, we can bring that up. And then we'll be reconnecting with you after this meeting as well to continue to get feedback. So between now and the November meeting, the Bellwether team will be working on two things. One is to pull together a draft of the full report. So it'll include feedback that we've received from you to date, information that you've shared with us that is coming from stakeholders with whom you have engaged that's aligned with the report, new ideas that come out of today's conversation, and we'll be providing that draft to you in whole for your review and feedback. And we'll work through that revision process collectively. We will also be sharing with you the year one addendum, so the data analysis. Last time we were together, we shared kind of that top line statewide data. Brian especially, is pulling down the district level data, and we're in the process of sifting through all that, organizing it, analyzing it. and we will get that out to you as well. So we'll be running those two processes in parallel and seeking your feedback and input. Any questions there? All right, I'm going to keep going. And then when we come back together in November, we will have a lot to wrap up. So expect a busy day and another packed agenda, but we'll be addressing any outstanding issues related to content that we need to discuss in the report. Our aim is to complete any final line editing. So we'll do that as a group and vote on the final version of the report. In addition, we'll be doing the same thing with the year one addendum. So we'll have a lot to sift through, but you will have had ample opportunity ahead of that meeting to engage with the full report, provide feedback, and have that reflected in the draft that you're considering for November. Any questions about process before we dig into specific items? All right, I'm just seeing people stare at me, so we're going to keep going. All right. You may not remember, but we had originally last time, we were going to start with individual recommendations, and we flipped the order here because we want to start with the big picture feedback for sort of efficiency reasons. Kelly, can you go to the next slide? So we got 4 pieces of what we've sort of categorized as overarching feedback. And with your permission and indulgence, we think we can address these in the drafting process and then get something back to you that you can actually react to. The 4 pieces of feedback was 1, to elevate gaps in data across various cuts of student characteristics and backgrounds, to more clearly connect the recommendations to gaps in performance and outcomes for students. We're, as I said, in the process of doing the data analysis on the most recent testing data and the trends that precede that. And so I think we can handle this piece ourselves kind of behind the scenes in the writing process and bring it back to you so you have something specific to react to. The second piece is to include an executive summary or a one-pager at the beginning of the report that includes those top takeaways and sets a clear vision for the state. We totally agree, would love to draft that for you and give you the opportunity to then respond to it. Typically, the executive summary is the last thing that you write after you kind of know all of the meat of it. So we want to make sure that, we will definitely make sure that that incorporates all of those edits. And we already have some specific feedback from some of you to give us some guidance there. So we'll bring back a draft to you when we give you the draft of the full report. There was a question about the 8 recommendations not being in any obvious order, and a few different suggestions for how to handle that. We did tee this up in the survey that we circulated to you individually in the last few days, and thank you very much. Everyone responded. It's super helpful. I think it'll help us jumpstart our conversation today. The sort of consensus in the survey data was that we should not try to force an order on them right now. But leave it as is, but be explicit that they're not necessarily in a priority order. I think this is a decision we may want to revisit once we see it all together. And if there are clear priorities and some consensus in the group around that, we can certainly revisit that decision. But at this point, I think we're going to suggest that we leave it the way it is and then bring you back a draft to look at. And then the last overarching piece of feedback was to use stronger and more compelling action language and action verbs for the 8 recommendations. Again, totally agree and feel that we can address this in the editing process and bring back something for you to react to. So would just ask if there are any questions or concerns about how we're planning to approach this or specific pieces that you want us to make sure we're addressing as we get into the drafting and the editing of the report that kind of pertain to these things.
One thing that I'm thinking as we go through is that maybe in addition to or near the section where we have the executive summary, it might not hurt to have a similar, I don't know, document or something that we call the legislative takeaway menu or something like that. You know, in other words, hey, here's your 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 15, whatever things that might need to happen in a kind of a short, concise piece. It could be another 1 page or something close. You know, I don't know. I know Glenn's had some good outreach, and he might have a perspective on it. I'm not sure if Dolores is still having some trouble getting on, or Lou could certainly weigh in and offer any changes there. But just as I'm listening to it, that's something that's coming across my brain. I don't know if it's hitting with anyone else.
Great idea. But I would like to hear from Dolores and Glenn if they have any specific, or Lou, if they have any specific comments.
Can you hear me? Hi, this is Dolores Gresham. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's a great idea, Nathan. The other possibility is to arrange the information in terms of K-12 and higher ed, just to make it simple, and then a summary off of that, a legislative takeaway after that. But at this point, that's just a suggestion. As we go through, I'm sure we can see things kind of sift out and how they relate to each other. So, but I very much like the planned approach, and it looks good, and we've certainly got plenty to work with. Thank you.
All right, we will take that back with us and incorporate it into our plan.
Jen, hey Jen, this is Glenn.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a good time or not, but we're talking about targets, who write it to the legislative, et cetera. I just, in my stakeholder, I didn't limit my stakeholder meetings to just legislators. And there's a lot of energy out there by corporate, by not-for-profit, by academics, and clearly legislative. So I would hope that we're not targeting this just to the legislature and policy, because there's a lot of, first off, there's a lot of alignment around the 8 recommendations. So my hat's off to the team here for that. But, if I'm off track, y'all need to tell me. I quit interviewing other people, but a lot of people are going to read our report. There's a lot of energy around literacy and some very specific thoughts about how we spend our money if it's not helping a person read, write, compute, math, and by the way, helpful if they can have some good interpersonal. So I would welcome input, and maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way, that I look at it broader than just the legislature. And I do agree we ought to have executive summary. We ought to have takeaways, make it easy for people to digest. So comments would be most appreciated.
So Glenn, I also, I visited with a variety of people from stakeholder standpoint. So I think that you were spot on with that. And as I understand it, the other commission members also were speaking with a variety of different types of stakeholders, not just our legislature or any sort of elected community members. Ultimately, this report is for all of Tennessee, though I think our primary audience is the General Assembly and the governor, based on the fact they put this commission together. I think if I look back on our last report, the way we tailor the communication, I think can be tailored in a way that's good for everyone, regardless of whether they're coming out of the nonprofit space, the business space, or whatever the case might be. So I think a lot of it has to do with messaging. I think we're on the same page. Any of those thoughts on Glenn's comment before we move on? Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Jen.
All right. Very good. So moving into some of the specific recommendations, and again, we're not going to talk through all 50-something that recommendations that are currently on the table, just the ones where we got some conflicting feedback, where you all need to have some additional conversation. We did change up these slides a little bit from the versions that you saw previously that we provided to you earlier, because we did ask you for your feedback via a survey. So we've included those data on these slides here to sort of get us going. It doesn't mean that, we're taking those survey responses as our direction, but just to give you an ingoing sense of where your fellow commissioners' heads are on some of these questions as we start this conversation. And you'll see there's a few places where there's some consensus and a few places where people are kind of various minds. So let's move on in. So starting with the first specific recommendation where there is a question, This is the recommendation to expand existing models of this is a higher education recommendation to expand existing models of on-time completion, in particular moving to full-time enrollment being 15 hours rather than 12. The feedback that we received is that the recommendation to move from 12 to 15 hours as full-time removes flexibility for students. So the suggestions that had come to us was just to remove that bullet point from underneath this top line recommendation. So we asked you in the survey whether we should remove it or keep it, and the sort of lion's share of folks asked to have it removed, but certainly wanted to open this up if folks want to share their input here, particularly if you are in this sort of leave it as it is category, if you want to make your case.
Can you hear me? This is Dolores Gresham.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, the recommendation, I think, should just stay as it is and remove that particular bullet point, because there is already a continuing effort in higher ed to do that very thing. And there have been bills in the past to bring that about, to streamline the systems. So I don't know, maybe Nathan can remember some of those bills, but the most recent one was a complete comprehensive rewrite, especially on grants. But there's been for years that effort to streamline the systems in order to make it easier for students to move between institutions and courses of study. So I think the bullet point is really redundant.
Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of what legislations come out, I mean, we've seen that in different places. Hawaii was the first to do the 15 to finish, I think, is a statewide initiative. But and I'm starting to teach college again this semester, just, you know, part-time on the side. And if you take fewer than 15 hours, you just simply cannot graduate in 4 years. Or if you're taking fewer than 15 hours, you can't graduate in 2 years for an associate's degree. But, you know, obviously it's up to the majority of the commission. I don't know, Lou, you could offer some more benefit on that, but I think the UT system is already pretty much gone in that direction. And I don't know about all the remaining institutions, but you know, when you look at graduation rates for 4-year institutions, they have to take it at a 6-year aggregate. And the reason they have to take it as a 6-year aggregate is because the system is built on 12 hours being full-time, but you cannot graduate in 4 years taking 12 hours a semester. So that's why they have to aggregate it by 6 years. I don't know if Lou, if there's more to it than that.
I would like to add that for financial aid, actually, to tie those two together, 12 hours is full-time equivalent for financial aid. So I think that's originally where the 12 hours came from. So I think that might be something students consider.
And then if we go down this pathway, we would need to evolve the financial aid to support 15 hours. Is that correct?
Yes, because for financial aid, 12 hours is considered to be full-time, and that's how they're funded. So anything above 12 hours is funded for full-time students. So we would definitely have to bring that into the conversation.
So would you recommend then changing that from 12 to 15 in order to get financial aid? And that would speed things along. It certainly would incentivize folks to take those 15 and graduate within a reasonable period of time. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I would just say that if financial aid made 15 a full-time equivalent, that would move everyone into the same direction. It would be a requirement instead of an option.
Oh, I like that.
Lou, what's your perspective on this? Is TSAC already going down this pathway or no?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Lou to provide a perspective on whether TSAC is going down this pathway already or not.
I don't know.
I just believe as long as financial aid will support 12 hours as a full-time equivalent, mandating 15 hours will be redundant because students, they will be able to take 12 hours and still be considered full-time.
Well, then you could make that the bullet point. That you recommend that financial aid, what she said, that the financial aid begins at 15 hours. So that would be the bullet point rather than the one that we have. I like that.
I think Lou is muted.
Yeah, he's trying to figure out how to unmute, I think. Oh, wait, now we hear you.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you. I think I was muted from external parties. I don't know what to think about that exactly, but so here's, and I think the problem has been highlighted here, which is we have a disconnect between what the federal guidance on full-time equivalent is and what we as a state have been trying to encourage and incent, which is expedited on-time completion. I think if you look at the UT system, they realized that there were very few ways to really incent without financial aid students to pursue 15 hours. And so what they did was they changed their base tuition model, which is to say you pay for 15, you're welcome to take 12. Oddly enough, when people pay for 15, they tend to take closer to 15. And that's been their experience. And so those programs have been largely successful. I think that from a financial aid perspective, so much of our financial aid is tied to the same federal guidance like Pell and other Title IV programs, all of which rely on 12. I'll just give you this piece of context. We just recently had a meeting for the Outcomes-Based Funding Formula Review Committee. And one of the items on the table was just this, was looking at the 6-year graduation rate. And unfortunately, I think a number of our campuses feel like they have essentially topped out their growth, even though they're only in the 50s. When you have institutions that believe they've maxed out their growth on the 6-year graduation rate, which by the way is not an on-time graduation rate, that is time and a half, then I think you have a bigger issue. If we as a state, and if this report wants to encourage that, I think it's a worthwhile encouragement, which is the closer we get to on-time completion, that being 4 years for 4-year institutions and 2 years for 2-year institutions, that does nothing except save the state and the students significant dollars. So I think every bit of encouragement that this report or any external party can provide to our policymakers along those lines is a good thing. Whether it needs to be explicitly stated, go to 15 rather than 12, that's, I don't really have an opinion on whether you include the bullet point or not. I think there are a number of things that can be done to help expedite student completion, both on the campus level and from the state policy level, which I think is covered by your primary recommendation.
One question I would ask. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So let me understand what you're suggesting is to leave the recommendation 7A just as it is, and then have expect the legislature to discover incentivizing approaches to improving the 4-year graduation rate. Is that what you're saying? Just leave the recommendation as is without that bullet point?
I would say so, only from this perspective. The recommendation, is really speaking to kind of a number of things that benefit students, not the least of which is the streamlining transition from institution to institution or sector to sector. That's not always associated with quote on-time completion as it
Okay.
is, maximizing the value of any prior education at one institution. I'll give you, for instance, our transfer pathways, which ostensibly our students can go to a community college, get their associate degree, and transition seamlessly into a four-year institution. We've had some problems over the years with, the asterization, if you will, of those pathways, which we are trying to work through, but focusing on that seamless transition will
Right.
automatically help you with students on-time completion. The 15 to finish can almost be its own separate,
True.
line of recommendations, if that makes sense.
Let me
So,
just, if we look at the rest of the recommendations under 7A, which are not listed on this slide, but in the handout that was provided, I feel like a lot of the other recommendations cover what Lou is describing without having to have this one in there. So I'm trying to balance that perspective.
perhaps instead of the period after regardless of type, you had a semicolon that said something about incentives to complete courses of study in 4 years or whatever verbiage. So you would make it all one recommendation. So that it would be not only streamlining systems, but also to recommendation to
Encourage on-time completion.
yes, provide incentives for on-time completion, something like that. So it just still all be one 7A recommendation.
I think you
Or
could
can
actually,
we, can I,
in
can
keeping
I,
with that, I think you could actually constrain or remove the language relative to the hours in specifics and focus instead on leveraging streamlined transition for students as an instrument to complete on time. One of the obstacles students face is when they transition from one institution to another is having to go back in time and retake coursework or realign themselves to the ultimate credential that they're pursuing, which again adds time to their overall degree pathway. So I think you could actually you could focus elsewhere on the 15 to finish component, but still leave that seamless transition as a key element in students completing on time.
Commissioner Jones, did you have a comment?
yes, I would like to say, I would recommend on that first bullet, just ending at completion and not including the particular move, but just say expanding existing models of on-time completion. And then we can work on getting those 15 hours at some point.
That may work. And I think that the other thing to remember is that after this report is done, 6 months later, there's going to be a final report. And if members are passionate about some of those extra specifics, they can show up in the June, as a final act of the commission. So there will be another bite at the apple.
This is Glenn. I've listened patiently to this conversation, and I've got to wonder the common sense thought about it as a parent, as a grandparent. We have 4-year institutions, we have 2-year institutions. Last I looked, we don't have 5-year and 6-year institutions. And we're also stressing the importance of math and to be able to do math. And here our math doesn't even work. So, and then I know that thought, Yolanda, about putting this off. We're charged with, in our 3 years, our one term, to come up with recommendations to not only recover, but also to innovate the delivery system of education. I'm puzzled why we wouldn't step up to this and just say, leave it as it is. And I don't even know how I voted the first time around, but just this conversation's convinced me is move to 15. If you do 15 as a parent, because I've seen many parents question, why aren't their Johnny or their Nancy graduating in 4 years? They took 12 hours. So that's Glenn's 2 cents. Anyway, thanks for listening.
I'm with Glenn, except for the thing that the bullet point narrows it and kind of restricts what you're trying to do. So
I know
because
when my son-
we're held back by that financial aid thing. If you're only going to give me money for 12 hours, well, that's all I'm going to take, you know? So that would have to be, you'd have to change that if you want to really incentivize this 4-year completion rate. And I agree, if you have a 4-year institution, you ought to get out by 4 years.
Maybe we structure our curriculum around where they can do both. That senior year is wide open with opportunities I've learned about coursework, course schedules, and working. And I know when my sons went to school, they gave me that their programs are harder and you don't graduate in 4 years. I said, that's nice to hear, but old dad's money cuts off after 4 years. There's nothing wrong with the summer. There's nothing wrong with it. I know I'm old, I'm the oldest one on the team. I got that. But I think we got to put some common sense to this.
Glenn, I tell you, just talking about that exact point, the immediate benefit of doing the 15 to finish is an average savings of $30,000 in that 5th year. That doesn't happen because you've actually graduated with your bachelor's in 4 years.
There's a report out today. There's a report, I'm sure y'all saw the report today, about the value of how education is increasing the skills and the pay. And it's, and yet we got students that don't even want to come to class. They don't even want education. So I'm just puzzled. And I think that puzzlement is our opportunity to do something about it. This is one of those that says, if you want to go, you need to take full time and you need to graduate in 4 years and get on out there and earn that money. So anyway, I'd go to 15 hours.
I agree with Glenn. This is Frank, but I have a question. What is the downside if we do this? I mean, who gets hurt by this if we say raise it to 15? I don't see where the negative is. So if I get some feedback, then I may change my mind.
I think some of the feedback that I've heard before is it reduces the flexibility for certain people that are not able to stay in for 12 hours even or for 15 hours. And so you think about people that might be working or other scenarios. I would also do have to put out there that are we being too prescriptive with this? If our recommendation is to streamline systems and processes to enable students to move seamlessly between institutions regardless of type, or if we even add on-time graduation to that higher level recommendation, who's to say that and Lou, you might be able to feed into this, I probably should know this too, but what if a school says we're going to, our credentials, it's only going to take a total of 8 hours, I'm making it up, or do we have to be on credits, and how do we think about things differently? What do we think about when we think about Google credentials or other businesses? I feel like we are very focused on what exists today as opposed to really encouraging innovation. But I'd love to hear other perspectives on that.
Dear Scarlett, this is Joey Wan. I really I think we need to listen to what Lou's saying and what Dr. Jones has said. And I love the expand existing model to on-time completion period. I think we have to be real careful that we stay in our lanes and we let the people that are working in that arena each day try to get us to there rather than being so specific in certain areas. I think we have to let the people that are working that every day kind of guide through that. And a period allows that to happen, a period after completion. And yes, it should be 15, but I'm not sure that the commission needs to go down to be that specific.
As I remember, Senator Kelsey reminded us that we're supposed to be bold. We're supposed to, not only recover, but innovate. And I guess, the point about how specific we ought to be. In my interviews so far, I got to tell you, my stakeholders have been incredibly specific. Y'all haven't heard anything from Glenn yet, that it's going to bring up what they want to do. And this is certainly not the biggest one. This didn't even come up in my conversations. So I just remember, we're not running, next year, old Glenn, you can tell Glenn goodbye and going back to the East Tennessee, and our committee stops. So I think we be bold. I think we just say, hey, first off, it just doesn't make sense that you can, the math doesn't work. If you go 12 hours for 4 years, you're not going to graduate from one of our 4-year schools. And so, and yet we're critical of the students not being able to do math. Maybe we're not on level either.
I agree, Glenn. This is our one big chance.
Well, I'll add that students are able to register full-time for 12 or more hours. So all students do not just register for 12. They may register for 15, they may register for 18. They can register for 20 hours. What some students find is the load of the classes that they're taking sometimes is too much. So they end up dropping classes. That is something that can happen. In most cases, it does happen. So not registering for 15 hours is not the only primary reason students do not graduate on time. Sometimes they are not successful in the classes that they take. They have to retake. So there's other options, but all I'm saying is 15 hours is great, but I do feel that until the federal regs match what we want, just saying that we want to move forward with on-time completion would be a perfect, I guess, leeway into our full intentions.
So we take an easy way out and change this wording around. It says, okay, if you take only the current metric is 12 hours, if you take that, you're not going to graduate in 4 years. And just call it what it is. And we're talking about 4 years.
Open to whatever the commission votes on. I was just relaying my thoughts.
Lou, is CSAC or TSAC, are they required to follow the federal guidelines on this, or can they do their own thing? Can they change financial aid to be 15 versus 12?
We absolutely have the authority to change that. Well, I say we. So, I mean, these are state dollars. These are state tax dollars. These are lottery dollars. And, we can, in the stewardship bucket, we can determine how we want to use those dollars to incent whatever it is we want to incent from a public policy perspective. And so, it is possible that we could, reorient the requirements or criteria for receiving HOPE dollars or promise dollars. And we can determine that full time for the purpose of state financial aid is 15. That would be a General Assembly, I think, lever to pull. And, but we could do it. There's no requirement that we hold our financial aid to the same as Title IV federal financial aid.
I think there'd be legislative support for that. I think that'd be really, really easy to do. There's a great line in the movie Jurassic Park where the scientist says, nature finds a way, and if people really want to finish in 4 years, they will finish in 4 years. If they really want to go to school 15 hours, they will go to school for 15 hours and get it done. But nature will find a way. So that's where I get my profound philosophy of education. Jurassic Park.
Well, I think if we decide we're going to keep this, we're going to have to add something in here about evolving the financial aid support.
Agreed. You could, yes.
At this point, yeah, Yolanda, go on. Is someone trying to talk?
Do we need a motion to do this, Madam Chair?
No, not right now, because we're in workshop. And so once we come out of the workshop, we'll do an official vote on these recommendations. So my suggestion for right now is if there's other objection, then let's hear it. If there's not, then let's keep the bullet as is, but we'll need to add in something to do with evolving the financial aid to support the 15 hours versus 12 hours.
Can occur.
That makes a stronger recommendation all the way around. I'm sitting here listening to all of the different perspectives there. It's just been pretty tremendous to observe, because you all bring just this wealth of background and things that you do and all the people you've talked to and the worlds that you're living in. And you're all tremendously devoted to education and making this thing work. But the different perspectives, I mean, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like out of disagreement may come a stronger recommendation. That's exactly how it's supposed to work.
I think some of the people that might have disagreed with this may not be on the call today. And so I think we might want to spend a little bit of time thinking about, not necessarily discussing right now, but certainly thinking about the removing the flexibility for certain students, because I think that was some of the concern. So it's something for us to consider and get further consideration for if we want to add another recommendation tied to maybe part-time students. But in the meantime, I think this going forward with what we have right now and then adding something tied to financial aid is probably a wise decision. So without any objection, Jen, we can probably move on to page 2.
Yes, let's move on to page 11, to be fair.
Good.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so this one has to do with the same top line recommendation that we were just discussing: streamline systems and processes to enable students to move seamlessly between institutions regardless of type. And the feedback was that we either needed more bullet points or fewer bullet points here. So we had a range of suggestions here that you'll see down the right-hand side of this slide that include adding a bullet point that reads incentivize 4-year institutions to partner with 2-year and TCATs to advance transfer pathways. Lots of support for that recommendation in the survey data. We also had a recommendation to add a bullet point that reads create tracks that include liberal arts education and a trade, for example, an English major with an HVAC minor. And we have the other 2 options are leave the existing bullets as they are, don't add anything additional. And then nobody said revise in a different way. Now that's just survey data, so you may have a different perspective this morning or this afternoon. Is it morning or afternoon yet for you all? Afternoon. Than you did when you answered the survey. But essentially, we're thinking of adding 1 or 2 additional bullet points to this list. Those are the one about the TCATs and the one about a trade, or leaving the recommendation and all its bullet points intact the way it is. And I know you're probably reading, so I'll give it a second to, but questions, comments, thoughts?
I love this idea of liberal arts with an HVAC minor. I think what at Lane College that started doing that, where they would have all of their students go to also go to the local TCAT, so you had to get like with both of them at once. I mean, I'm not saying anybody should make the recommendation or not. I just thought that was kind of cool. I hadn't seen that before.
I think as I understand it, again, this might be a question for you, is that the 4-year schools are less likely to want to engage in this. So I think there is a level of incentivization that would be needed to really create that partnership for pathways, because we're not seeing a lot of that happen right now. Whether that is incentivizing just the 4-year institutions, or if that is somehow a package deal between the 2-year or TCAT and the 4 years, I don't know, but conceptually, I think this makes sense. I'd love to hear other perspectives, though.
Is it possible to, as we think about high school and how students spend their time, is it possible we could do this in that way where they come out of high school with an AA degree, and it could be liberal arts, it could be, an English major, or it could be the HVAC, and kind of package it together, that we would encourage that.
So if that is elsewhere in our recommendations, I think this is really, I don't know, I feel like this is really just between the institutions at a secondary level or a post-secondary level.
The 3rd bullet point where it says conduct a full assessment and redesign, I think is pretty comprehensive and would probably include all the other bullet points just in that one recommendation. Conduct a full assessment and redesign of Tennessee transfer pathways ought to be inclusive, or one would think would be inclusive of all the other bullet points.
I would just jump in here real quick that on that particular bullet point, I mean, to Dolores's point, we are conducting kind of a deep dive on the transfer pathways right now, trying to clean up again those asterisks that have been applied to a lot of these degree pathways over the years. We have had a fairly good reception from the four-year institutions on the pathways we've worked on so far. We're about to begin the more difficult set of pathways, which are all focused on STEM. And so, the bullet point itself is absolutely, I think, a critical recommendation that kind of deep dive be done. And whether or not that incents the rest of this, I think is what's really up for discussion.
I would like to add the first bullet point that had the 6 recommendations for suggestion. So I would like to see that.
Dr. Jones, I'm sitting here looking at that. That just seems so natural, doesn't it? I mean, that seems like it just flows beautifully. So.
Yes, most definitely.
And I do think, per Senator Gresham's comment, I think what's missing from the existing bullet is the incentivized piece. And we can put some more specificity on that and amend that into the bullet that's kind of thematically adjacent to this idea.
So, and I think you'd have to, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lou, but you have some fundamental problems between accrediting bodies in higher education. So when you have like national accreditation versus regional accreditation, and then you also have, that's like the Associate of Applied Science degree. A lot of times there's a great deal of problems getting that to transfer into a 4-year degree unless it's a Bachelor of Applied Science. It's just some are more industry and some are more sort of, I guess, traditional academic. But the other issue is that these accrediting bodies, they're not a function of government. It's one of the things that safeguards our higher education and makes it so that our accreditation means something, because the academic endeavors themselves get together to say, okay, this is our gold standard. So without the incentivization, and you call me out if I'm just totally wrong on this, but I think without the incentivization, some of those transfer pathways down to the TCAT level would meet with significant barriers. You just say, Nathan, you talk too much. It's okay.
I can't hear Lou.
Lou, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Yeah, Lou's apparently muted again, and he has no idea why.
Well, and he's a little dark on my screen. He looks like he's in witness protection, too.
Yeah, there, he's lightening up now.
Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. No, I think Nathan's absolutely right. The issue we have is not so much the accreditation, because one, and Dr. Jones knows this. When you bring the faculty and the institutions together to sort it out, that's what the accrediting bodies want you to do. Once you have established amongst yourselves that you're willing to accept credits for credits or partial credits for credits, whatever that articulation looks like, as long as the faculty have been involved and the institutions have been involved, the accrediting bodies are going to be fine with it. Where we kind of run into issues here in Tennessee is developing a scalable articulation across all 3 sectors, the TCATs, the community colleges, and the universities, is the transition really from contact hours to credit hours. And I will say that we do have some pockets in the state where we are moving past that, particularly in those disciplines that have a number of industry type credentials associated with them, because in those cases, multiple credential types all rely on those industry credentials for progress. So I think there's some work being done here. I think that we could definitely afford to put our foot a little heavier on the pedal. And so I absolutely incent this all day long, to your point, Nathan.
I just put in the chat the high school recommendations just so you can see kind of side by side. There are the first couple of bullets there are very much in line with this conversation as well about connecting those post-secondary opportunities down to the high school level.
So
I
yeah, go on, Jen.
I was just going to say, so I think what I'm hearing is that we have a really good alignment about wanting to incentivize this kind of transfer pathway, and that we can incorporate that into the existing bullet point, just make it stronger and more specific. Is that, I can see a thumbs up from Frank. I can only see a handful of you. So if there's objection, you need to speak up. All right, Tara, do you think we're ready to move on? Does that sound right?
Yes, let's move on.
Very good. All right. Okay, sorry, move me to my screen. Okay, so this one has to do with high school recommendations, and this is one where I think we have a little bit more of a spread in terms of folks' perspective on where we should go with this. So this is another recommendation similar to the one we just discussed that has kind of a big thematic bolded recommendation here, which is to strengthen existing and create new opportunities and pathways for students to progress through high school at their own pace. And then a number of specific recommendations underneath that relate to access to TCATs and kind of other opportunities to more efficiently, effectively, and productively use senior year time, for example, some competency-based progression recommendations where students can demonstrate mastery of content and move on, as well as student supports through mentoring to help them explore their career goals and chart their post-high school path. The feedback that we heard was that some of those recommendations feel too granular for folks, and that the full set of bullet points doesn't fully capture what a vision for rethinking high school might look like. So we presented 4 potential pathways for resolving this in the survey and got kind of a range of responses. So I think we need to have some conversation here, ranging from leaving it the way it is to revising it to be more specific to revising it to be more general and a charge to sort of continue investigating this. And you'll see in the blue font there is a specific suggested revision from one of the commissioners. So this one, I feel like we do need to open up for a good bit of discussion, and would welcome input from folks who have strong feelings here.
You have any strong feelings you want to share? Glenn?
This is one of the topics that came up repeatedly in my stakeholder, and I know we're not looking for new things today, so this is very much consistent. TCATs need to be, I'll just cover the range of it. TCATs need to be more where, if you look at it from an industry perspective, this came from industry. We need more TCATs in the county we're in. So I'm sure, Yolanda, you hear that a lot, like Shelby and other. Teachers for TCAT. Compensation like transportation for students. So a lot of support around TCAT and tighten that. And I think almost invariably, everybody brought that up. So a lot of support around this whole area here.
And I would agree that the inclusion of TCAT, we need to be deliberate on that in this report because of how it is being viewed and tying into post-secondary, along with transfers, along with looking at it as a viable choice. So I do agree. I do like the bullet that pertains to looking at not per se tracks, but making it a viable option.
Absolutely.
So Yolanda, so then are you suggesting that you like the second one here, revise all or most of the bullet points under the recommendation 6 to call for a
Yes.
full overhaul? Okay.
Yes.
You know,
Dr. Jones, sorry. I was
No,
just going to clarify. I think you said, but that you definitely want to still call out the TCATs in particular. Is that correct, Dr. Jones?
That is correct.
Okay.
So
sorry to interrupt.
The concept of telling, I mean, effectively, we'd be telling the General Assembly if we take these specifics out, then you're asking 132 people who have varying ideas about what ought to be done that, okay, y'all need to go ahead and reimagine this. Whereas if you leave the bullet points in there, each of those are deliverables that one of the members can run with over the course of the next decade. Every bit of this, I think, goes into reimagining what high school can be. And I'd hate to lose the granularity, just because I guess I've made my living since 1998 mostly in the creation of law. And if you brought a report in an office, whether it's a congressman, a senator, or a state representative or whatever, and they look through that, it's like, okay, this is a nice idea. What am I supposed to do again? Whereas a lot of these bullet points are, I can draft a bill and make this happen. I can help. And so just as a general suggestion, don't be afraid of granularity and don't be afraid of being bold in terms of that. There's nothing in the world wrong with putting a bow around it, but I just wouldn't lose detail.
I definitely agree. And I would like to keep, I think what I was suggesting that we add that additional bullet. It says add it to the existing. So,
yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay.
Nathan, this is Glenn. I'm all with you on that. I think we got this one shot for this report here, and I would expect it to be used, it'd be torn, tethered, and used for years and years. So I would put as much in there that's bold and improving, education, innovating it as we can. And then we can summarize the key takeaways that we really need in what timeline.
So what it sounds like, I feel like I'm hearing is a combination of 2, 3, and 4 under the suggested revisions. So we would like to have a variety of different pathways. We would want to make sure that it includes a TCAT, but we also want to make sure that the funding is the funding is appropriately distributed. Am I hearing that right? And combining all of those to add a new bullet under the current recommendation list?
And I would just offer up, Tara, that we don't lose since our mission is around K through career, we don't lose the tremendous impact that we can have on industry with getting our students, ready when they graduate to go to work-based experience. So don't lose that.
I totally agree with you on that, and I'm scanning through here. I'm not seeing anything in here. Well, I guess the mentoring programs. We haven't specifically called out apprenticeships as we had the conversation with Commissioner McCord last time, and I think that is an important thing to talk about work-based learning.
Work-based learning is in the second bullet, but we can specifically call out apprenticeships, and we will spell out work-based learning and not abbreviate it in the actual report.
I hope you also spell out CLEP. I do not like that
It's a
abbreviation.
bad acronym.
It's just really bad acronym.
Your favorite
Um,
word.
So, in scanning through these two, it strikes me that if we do combine suggested revisions 2, 3, and 4, that it would replace the first bullet, which is ensure every high school student has access to a TCAT, if that's what we're rephrasing it to be.
I do think there's a little bit of a shade of a difference to ensuring every high school student has access to a TCAT and sort of establishing technical and professional tracks.
Okay. All right.
Those feel different to me.
Okay.
But I'd say they feel different because they are substantially different. You know, so that's probably the reason why. But, you know, access is a whole different issue necessarily than the setting up the tracks. They're probably both good ideas. I mean, ultimately, one of the things in American education is that we give everybody 400,000 chances almost. You know what I mean? Whereas if you're in Germany, you take a specific test when you're 14 and it's about laid out for the rest of your life. You know, so there's been times in American education when we do more of this sort of bifurcated track, and times when we just say, you know, pick what you want as you go. So.
And I think what we're suggesting here is we want students to be able to pick what they want as they go, as long as there's a TCAT involved somehow or another.
To me, this is one of the overarching is what I've learned is one size education like we have today doesn't fit everybody. So here's a prime example where we can stress that in a report. The access to TCATs, the access to do curriculum with, you know, between the, you know, pathways. So to me, this is very important, you know, especially with a connection with industry.
I want to ask you all a question. We talked a lot about bringing post-secondary, like the TCATs, into the high schools. We haven't talked at all about enabling or empowering colleges, universities, and TCATs to start their own school. Am I just adding to a topic, Jen, or should I we're talking about bringing stuff down as opposed to enabling the post-secondary to have their own K-12?
Like the University of Memphis
really
has.
Talked about that, yeah.
Okay.
Could be a good June report topic as well.
Okay, I think we're good on this one, Jen. If we're going to combine suggested revisions 2, 3, and 4 into one and add it under the added recommendations.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. We're moving. Okay. So this one we're switching gears here towards Educator Pipelines. And the recommendation that we're working with here is the top line recommendation is to expand the educator pipeline by supporting the creation and expansion of programs that recruit and retain diverse, high quality educators. The feedback issue has to do with this one bullet under here, which is require teacher preparation programs to set diversity goals around enrollment and completion and report on annual progress. The feedback that we got is that EPP, educator prep programs, that's EPP, they partner with local districts which all have required diversity goals, so EPPs don't need their own goals. Essentially that we don't need two sets of goals. They can have the same goals. And a second piece of feedback is a concern that requiring diversity targets will lead to discrimination. So in the feedback via the survey, we gave a few options: to remove it, to leave it the way it is, to revise it to require EPPs to match their partner district's goals rather than creating new ones. And then there's an additional add there that was suggested by one of you in the survey to change it to read, create incentives for diverse students to enter teacher preparation programs and have programs actively recruit students to enter the program. So there seems to be a good amount of consensus around removing it, but y'all haven't seen that additional revision there. So
one little piece of context for that was sent to me by my colleague Amy Owen, who the State Board of Education does the educator preparation report card, and she wanted to note that the State Board of Education sets diversity goals for EPPs on the Educator Preparation Report Card, and it has done so for 5+ years, and has seen rates increase incrementally. This is not a quota because EPPs can earn points on this report card for approaching the goal, and the goal is set based on a rolling 3-year average of all EPPs. That's not to say do anything different, do the same thing. That's just a bit of context.
Questions, comments?
This is Glenn, just a clarification for me. And this came up in my interviews, by the way, the importance of, Dolores, to be music to your ears about teachers and pay. Teachers are going where the pay is best, et cetera. And the diversity, how important, not only for teachers, but for students. So, I for one, I don't know, get caught up in all this quotas and ratios, just which we're going to continue matching close as you can to your population there. And we know we want to be education in rural areas equal to education other places. So I'm just puzzled why we would get caught up in setting quotas, things like that.
As I understand it, the districts already have diversity goals. Joey, can you feed into that? Do you have any viewpoint on that?
As far as the diversity targets,
Yes.
What he's saying, what Glenn was saying makes a lot of sense as far as the population where you live. People tend to want to go back to where they came from.
Yep.
So, but I do think that that the universities could do a better job of actively recruiting. I do think I do think that we all could do a better job with that. But a lot of times teachers want to go home.
So it sounds like we are in a place of removing this bullet based on these votes and the conversation. Any objection to that? Okay. Jen, I think we're probably ready to move to the next one.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so this is, we're sticking with teachers right now. The recommendation that we got some feedback on is in the same vein. So strengthen the educator preparation and training professional development opportunities to ensure more high quality teachers are in the classroom. And the questions are, the feedback emerged around this bullet point: increase educator compensation and raise standards for entry to the profession, with the intent of elevating the profession and increasing competitiveness in the teacher labor market. You'll recall we had a pretty good discussion, lengthy discussion on this point in July. So the feedback is that there's no evidence to support the recommendation to raise educator preparation program standards like GPA or ACT scores to increase the quality of the teacher workforce, and that doing so may actually exacerbate existing teacher shortages. So the options that were suggested are to leave the bullet point as is, to remove the bullet point, to remove the raised standards for entry to the profession portion of the bullet and focus only on increasing salaries. And then 2 folks didn't respond to this particular question. So you can see there's a little bit of spread there on what the recommendation should do going forward. So. Questions, comments?
I'd like to know where the dog is that keeps barking.
It's my dog. I'm so sorry.
I was just curious. You asked if there were any questions.
She has a lot of questions, mostly about the man who is doing some work in my front yard. So I apologize.
Okay.
She will calm down.
Everything's coming out now, so. Well, I saw this morning where teachers I think it was 2.1% increase nationally, in line with a lot of other professions, college graduates. So, to me, what came up is we need to go attract the teachers that fit the profiles that we have in there that can, collaborate and pay them well and pay, because they're going to go to, they're going to go to the highest paid places. So anyway, I'm all for that. I know, Dolores, you were beating that drum that we need to do that. So that clearly is an area that we need to focus on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. I had a flashback, as a matter of fact, last night, where I remembered that when we had a bill to raise the standards for high school graduation, that there was a hue and cry from what we call the teacher workforce, that their kids couldn't handle this kind of academic rigor, that teachers didn't think it was necessary. And I mean, there was just hell to pay. And a teacher from Knoxville area asked to see Randy McNally. At the time, he was the chair of the finance committee. And so he wanted to have a meeting with McNally about this bill that would raise academic standards for high school graduation. And so when he came, he made it a point to say that he was not representing the teachers union. He was not representing an organization, but what he was asked to do was to come to see Senator McNally about what the real problem was. And he said the real problem was that the teachers wanted to raise the academic standards for high school graduation. They wanted to increase the academic rigor, but the fact of the matter was that they didn't know how. They didn't know how. They were not prepared to teach effectively. And that was what was worried about him. And that was what was causing all the acting out and the hue and cry of opposition to increasing these academic standards. So the fact of the matter was that they felt that they were not prepared to do the work. So that took us back to the teacher preparation in higher ed, rather than a student going into education, whether it was GPA or his ACT score. What the problem was that teachers felt that they were not prepared to do that. So all that puts into question what was going on in higher ed, what was going on in the teacher preparation programs, rather than the quality of students coming into the programs. Although there's probably certainly something to be studied there as well. So I just wanted to share that insight that my perspective kind of changed when I remembered that particular event. Maybe Nathan remembers the name of the bill that we had in those days about the raising those academic standards. It was like 2010, 2009, 2010, something like that, when we did that. So I'm not sure that keeping the verbiage in there about raising standards for entry into the profession is appropriate as I thought before, and that we need to turn our attention to the quality of the preparation programs and the academic rigor in those courses.
Glenn, what your perspectives back then are exactly right today. Is that I got limited. We had our panel of teachers at one of our meetings there that I opened my eyes. I've since talked to others, And the whole concept of be the go-to person, be the one that knows the education options. They're the glue. I think now would be the terrible time to send a signal to the teachers that we're going to focus on your abilities. And I would rather see us focus on how do we enable the teacher to do the job that needs to be done for the students. And if we look back on last year, the terrible travesty of how education, suffered, but a lot of the big reason was they didn't have that glueware of the teacher right in front of them all the time. So I, for one, would say, don't go raise the professional standards for teachers right now. Let's turn it around and how we can support them better. Listen, actually, what I've heard is they're not listened to. I know that's strong words, but we need to make sure we're listening to the front line called teachers.
And the evidence there is obviously 2/3 of our third graders in the entire state are not reading at grade level. 60% of the youngsters who take advantage of Tennessee Promise and show up at a community college require remediation in reading and math. So we know it's not working. Whatever it is, it's not working, whether it's the quality of the folks going into education or the quality of our preparation programs for teachers. So given that I had this flashback, now I'm looking more, my focus is now more on the quality of our preparation programs. So that was just the point I wanted to make there. But we know something is not working because our kids are not performing the way we know that they can.
Suggest a nice place to start would be by asking the teachers and asking the students, and that'll come out more when we get together again, as Jen said, on new stuff. That'll be the drum that I'll beat around. Listen, in the corporate world, we call it listening to the front line. We need to listen to them and ask them the question, what we can do better.
I would encourage the commission, visit a third grade school. Let third graders read to you. There's a lot to be said about reading on grade level and being able to read. You have a lot of life experiences that happen that each kid's. So when you're taking a test, your life experiences will impact your performance on the test. Go to a third grade and ask a third grader to read to you. See how many kids can read. I think you'll be surprised. Also, a lot of times you have to remember that when you're in a high school class, a middle school class, or even an elementary class, you're going to have kids from all levels. They all get the same treatment. Now, when you get to high school, you're going to have the ability to take advanced placement. Middle school as well, you're going to have some honors classes. So, if you're in a general, let's just say you're in geometry. Within a geometry class, you're going to have kids in there that are going to be engineers. You're also going to have kids in that same geometry class that will struggle with that content. Yeah, the teacher is expected to teach all of them. You differentiate, and they do a good job with that. So sometimes you may have teachers that are uncomfortable with the content, but by and large, it's not a content issue as much as being able to teach it to everybody a different way so that they all get it the same way to help them grow. And I don't know if that makes sense or not, but anyway, I agree. We need great teachers teaching our kids. Every kid deserves a great teacher. So we've got to train them better. We've got to train them better, and we've got to give them what they need. I will tell you that if we were to look at teacher salaries this year, yes, they need to be higher. However, if I've got teachers that are working an additional month of school a year, so that bumps the salary up. By providing the state, the legislature this year provided learning opportunities for kids in at least 6 weeks extra, sometimes even more. So that impacts salaries. There are ways that in working, and of course it is additional time, but yes, the base salary needs to go up. But anyway, go listen to a third grader. You'll be surprised.
Well, and I would look forward to that. But you bring up the point about the teachers' difficulties in a classroom where some of the youngsters are going to be engineers and some of them are not. Well, maybe we need to look at how we make up these classrooms and how we respond to the more gifted, as well as how we respond to youngsters who don't have the kind of advantages or the vocabulary or the background to succeed quickly. So, you know, we want each one of them to each one of the students to succeed and to reach their own potential. And maybe we better look at a different way of doing this. But I totally agree that preparation of our teachers and enabling them to be successful no matter what they're doing is where we ought to be. So I don't disagree with Joey. I don't disagree with him at all.
Tara, this is Frank. I agree with Dolores and Glenn that we remove the raised standards for entry to the profession. I feel the same way they do.
It sounds like I don't hear any objections to that, so it probably we're in a good place. In regards to the consideration of leaning on the EPPs from a curriculum standpoint, I would encourage us to think beyond just teachers, because teachers are able to grow extensively when they've got a great principal in their school who's able to help coach and guide them as they're either managing through a challenged class or just trying to get under their feet. And so I think that's a really important piece for us to consider as this particular one will evolve. So at this point, it sounds like we will be removing the raised standards for entry to the profession. But Jen, at some point, we will need to add one specifically tied to the EPP curriculum for teachers and for leaders.
Yeah, and I need to, when we hit a pause, I need to go and look, because I think we already have some recommendations related to EPPs that are in the sort of everyone agrees on these bucket. And I'll pull those out when we get to a natural breaking point and look to see where there may be more opportunities to amplify there.
This is Glenn. Just a quick observation about Joey, what you brought up and how you're handling what's available there today. I often wonder, are we taking advantage of all the legislation things? And it seems like you got a way to pay your teachers 6 weeks more. Are all of our school districts, do they understand how to do that? Have we done some audits so they know that?
It was allowed for every school district at a minimum of $1,000 a week, wasn't it, Joey? With all the summer school, I mean, that's what the legislature appropriated. Am I wrong about that?
We got 1 million students and we got a lot of schools. It just the ability for that size organization to everybody to be on the same page. I just want to make sure people, it goes back to one of our recommendations was we implement what's been given out there. Okay, that's all.
I'd like to see a point in our history where people who want to be great teachers decide they want to come to Tennessee, to one of our universities, to get the best preparation. And so that we have the best teacher preparation programs in the country. I think we can do that. And I think it's totally doable. It's like I go back to my profound insight into their nature will find a way. You know, we can do it. We know our kids can succeed better than they are now. I think we could probably have our preparation programs for teachers to be of first class.
Dolores, let's be sure and keep that point, because we're going to come to a point in our journey here. We got to have, how do we measure success or progress? And so metrics, that could be a very important metric around, are we attracting, how do we characterize the teachers that we're attracting? Same thing with students. Make sure industry there's no job going unfilled with a lack of Tennessee skilled students. You know, so we need to think, I'd ask everybody to be putting that in the back of their mind. How do we measure this? And metrics will help us with innovation. How successful we're being.
Yeah, Dolores, I agree with your vision there. I think that'd be a fantastic vision for us to have for the state.
And Kelly just dropped the current EPP related recommendations in the chat. So we did have some conversation around, for example, strengthening the clinical experience for teacher candidates. There's good research on that being essentially the most critical part of teacher training is their in-classroom experience, and also some things around professional development and using the data that's already collected on EPPs to inform program approval decisions. So we can revisit some of that as well if there's interest in that. But if we're ready, we can move to the last piece of specific feedback. So this is the set of recommendations around supporting students' well-being. There are several recommendations here, but the top line recommendation is to support schools and districts in addressing students' well-being in order to support their executive functioning. And that really refers to some of those soft skills that we've talked about in a few different contexts. It begins when kids are very young, but it really is those like self-regulatory, problem solving, working in a team, those kinds of skills, as well as their academic success and preparation for career. And we've got a handful of recommendations here. The feedback that we heard, three pieces of feedback or three buckets of feedback. One is to focus the well-being recommendations only on ACEs. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's a common term around how you assess trauma that young children in particular have been exposed to in their lives. And the rationale is that well-being and social emotional learning should happen at home except in instances of abuse. The second piece of feedback, broaden the focus of the well-being recommendations to include the well-being of families through family engagement strategies, teachers, administrators, and school staff. So kind of a different direction from narrowing it in the first piece of feedback to broadening it in the second. And then the last piece is ensure well-being recommendations support meaningful integration of well-being into the school day rather than a circle time approach. So ensuring that it's embedded throughout the school day and not kind of an isolated piece. So what we would suggest, given kind of the divergence of the feedback here, is to kind of focus first on a few key questions. One is, what is the ultimate goal that you want to see accomplished through your well-being recommendations? What are we aiming for? And that'll help us understand kind of where we may need to focus this recommendation. The second question to keep in mind is, what is the role of state policy in helping districts and schools to meet that goal? So as we think about recommendations we're making for legislative action, what do we want the state to do? How do we want the state to be engaged on this topic? And then given that, what is the best high-level recommendation to make, and what refinements do we want to put under that? So welcome conversation, input, comments.
So this isn't necessarily one of the things listed there, but this was one of the places that I got pretty strong feedback, and it was on the textbook commission creating that list. There's a big difference in districts across the state. So whittling down, putting that task on that particular group, there was a lot of concern across the state about that. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll concur with that, Joey. The feedback that I received is that really should be those sorts of decisions tied to that specific bullet should be done at a local level as opposed to a state level. But it's going to take a step back. If we look at the ultimate goal of this, I'd like to hear everyone's perspective on what do you think the ultimate goal of this, this particular higher level recommendation would be.
I think we probably need to look at the context of what has happened in Tennessee education in the last couple of years. The use of the word wellness and well-being can strike a particular note. The Department of Education started something about wellness checks. There was a task force appointed to find out what we should do about those kinds of things. But what they came out with, or what they claimed was their jurisdiction was on children from birth through higher ed. Well, the Department of Ed has no jurisdiction on children from birth. K-12 perhaps, but not from birth. And so what they proposed was kind of a system by which folks are appointed in each school district to visit families and to see, I don't know, how they were doing. I know it happened to one particular family in my county who had someone visit their house to find out how their children were doing. Well, those parents were quite upset that someone from the government had come to see how their children were doing. Thank you very much. We can take care of our children. As it happened, this particular set of parents were homeschooling their kids. They were entrepreneurs. They had a family restaurant. All the kids worked at the restaurant, and they were also being homeschooled. A very conservative family. They did not like the idea of government overreach, this kind of government overreach coming into their family to see how they were doing or how well they were taking care of their children. So that there was hell to pay in the legislature, because there was hell to pay among constituents who saw this as complete government overreach. So that's,
Dolores,
I think,
let me, yeah, we ran around many times on trying to figure out how do we define well-being, because it seems in our experience, when we originally used this phrase, we were kind of chasing the bingo terms and hoping that we had a new term that the General Assembly wasn't going to have on their bingo list, because we didn't want to create inflamed viewpoints because we're using the phrase well-being. So I will rephrase it for everyone here. And what we originally were talking about is we're defining well-being initially, which was the social and emotional support of the students. And, you know, with that filter in mind, and we think about the ultimate goal tied to this recommendation, any thoughts on how to support schools and districts in addressing students' social and emotional space?
Madam Chair, let me share some news, and Joey, I certainly would like to hear your thoughts on this. So the BP Review Committee, every year over the summer, they make recommendations about at least their top 5 recommendations for funding shifts and changes within the BEP, the K-12 funding formula. And this year, for the first time that at least I remember, their number 1 recommendation was not around educator compensation, but it was for the state to provide funding for the level of school counselors and school nurses. That was 1 and 2, to be up in accordance with national best practices. Absolutely every bit of having a counselor that's funded, so the local districts, I mean, you know, don't have to bear that cost, so that they have enough counselors to do the job. And the same thing with nurses. Every bit of that is about student well-being. And it also would be, if our report aimed in that same direction, it would be joining a chorus of advocacy for, you know, that would just bring Tennessee to the right place. Having a ton of school counselors doesn't sound the note of you know, the education sphere is going to occupy what's traditionally the role of a parent. It does, however, say we're going to be ready in this pandemic environment to respond better to challenges as they come, and this is going to offer substantive help to every K-12 school district out there. And that's why this group made it their number 1 and 2 priority. I can pull up the letter if it's of any benefit to anyone.
Nathan, I applaud that. Nurses, counselors, social workers. Now, that group may not have addressed social workers, but I will tell you, the work during the pandemic, right now, any question that comes aboard to a school, about COVID or quarantine, whatever, go to the nurse first. And every school in Tennessee, I believe, should have. There are also some other support places that Tennessee has. Coordinated school health, I know some of you will be familiar with, is a tremendous resource for well-being, as is family resource centers. So, but fully funding, adequately funding nurses, counselors, and social workers would be a tremendous boost for the emotional well-being of public education.
I think educators should have some level of professional development on supporting students at a very basic level when it comes to well-being, and also do you consider that something that we would recommend to be in the educator prep programs curriculum?
There is a level of training that is included, but it varies. There's a lot of training that's required by the state, not just in this area, but other areas. So, but definitely a need for additional training in that area.
This is Glenn. I guess what I picked up in talking with stakeholders, this is probably of all of our challenges the toughest. And a lot of data, and I'm not giving us any new information here, but a lot of data about the breakdown of family, ultimate importance of the family. The family's not there. And so the best we could do, I asked, what's the best we can do as a commission, and is to chip away at that and find places that we can make. So I know, Nathan, your point about nurses, about counselors, I would also add career to that, because when the students get to in high school, they should start thinking about where they're going, what are they going to do. They're probably thinking about, and I know I have years experience with Tennessee Achieves, and these are first-time families that have gone to college. Most everybody works. So the idea that we can help under well-being, and maybe it's not, I'm certainly not trained in this area, but I think of well-being as you have food, Maslow, you have food and safety. So put it, those kind of contexts. So that's, Tara, that's what goes through my mind. I honestly didn't recognize what the term executive functioning was. I go back to my corporate days. And so I'm trying to figure what in the world is that? So again, Jen, I would hope that we could use language that would be identifiable by our, 6-7 million people in Tennessee. Don't know that helped, but that's just how Glenn looked at this.
Yeah, Glenn, I think it's a good idea. Sorry, Dolores, go on.
If I may, I just wanted to explain the context in which all of this is happening. I am for recommendation 4. I support all those bullet points. That's not a problem, but it's just that we need to be aware of what has happened in the last year and a half, 2 years, along with the term well-being and wellness. So just to be alert to those kinds of things. And I would agree with Glenn that if there's any difficult issue that we had to address in this time and this place, certainly I would agree this is probably number 1. But recommendation 4, I'm all for. There probably ought to be something said about ACEs and child abuse. I'm on the board of directors for the local Carl Perkins Center, and the work that is done there is almost more than they can handle. So I think that maybe in some way we can address that when it comes to ACEs, and make sure that people are aware of those programs and the Carl Perkins centers that have to do with child well-being.
I will say I've just sent out the priority letter that the BEP committee did to our commission the email list from the last one that I sent out to everybody. So that's in there. It also breaks down the precise cost, okay, for each piece. What the senator said is certainly accurate. I mean, there's been so much there's so much sensitivity, I would say, around the issue that's what's caused the necessity there to kind of watch exactly how we talk about it, because we wouldn't want some misinterpretation to derail the report as a trusted resource for years to come.
So let me, based on hearing everyone's point of view and perspective and kind of where we're coming from, and thinking back to some other conversations we have had, as I remember it, you know, as we look at the goal for this particular, the well-being conversation, among other things, it's ultimately to be able to help students be as successful as they can possibly be, regardless of that age range. So in, you know, kindergarten through career, along that whole spectrum, what more can education in Tennessee be doing to help kids along that journey? And certainly academics, that is the number one focus when it comes to education. But so many kids are not being supported at home, or if they are, they're still coming in confused during a time of a pandemic, among other things, or you know, a flood or tornadoes, whatever the case may be. Being able to have a team or individuals that they can have conversations with, and being able to rely on those educators to at least hear them, feel like they're being listened to, feel like they can give them a little bit of hope. That's just some of what I remember of some of our conversations specifically tied to this. Are there any thoughts around that? As we going back to this question, is what is the ultimate goal that we want to see accomplished through the well-being recommendations? It strikes me that what I'm hearing and what I've heard in the past is that we want to make sure that students are set up for the best success. In some cases, it's not only academics.
Tara, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. And while it's a very slippery slope, I think it's worth traveling and enabling our teachers, when the topic comes up, or their ability to communicate and talk with students about their, you know, well-being. I'm not sure, maybe our teachers are all versed and have the ability to do that today, or get students to the counselor or something. To me, that would be a very worthwhile acknowledgement that I think we do need to acknowledge the well-being and how it's driven by the family and, you know, along the way. So how do we come up with some reasonable recommendations to talk about that? Because there's not going to be certainly no easy answer here to this.
One thing we have to keep in mind, a lot of times when you're having conversations that kids today are dealing with things that none of us have ever had any idea about. So if you're having a conversation with a kid and it gets to a certain point, you teachers, me, or any of you would get to a point where we would not be comfortable with that conversation anymore. So they have to be referred somewhere else. And that's where we're falling short, is there's not enough. There are more kids needing that intervention than qualified people to do that.
Joey, this came up in some of my conversations with him. Exactly right. You know, I'm not proposing we ill prepare, get students to the right place, but I talked with teachers about innovation, and they were very clear. They're not trained to talk about that. They're not encouraged. In their perspective of innovation, sometimes you make mistakes, and their compensation has been dependent on not making mistakes. So I think it's that whole area of listening to teachers and how do they deal with that. But so no, I certainly, there's a lot of issues I don't think we got people prepared to talk about out there. I know in my corporate days, I always stayed away from race. It's difficult to get into any meaningful discussion at the end of that without some backlash from it. So just a candid view of that, and I agree with what you're saying. But I do think we can help the teachers get to the subject matter experts that can if they have enough, it's all about trust. If they can have enough trust with the student, that the student will entrust them to, here's the problems I'm having. Can the teacher know who to go to? And I use the term go-to person, and the teachers I taught with said, we're not skilled to know where the go-to places are, even for education. And Joey, I see you shaking your head. That must resonate well.
Yes, sir, it does.
Are they not incented to do it? They don't have the resources to know where to go to be, in corporate world, we call it the go-to person. The ultimate you can be is be the go-to person for the CEO.
You know, ultimately, one of the hardest parts about the work of the State Board of Education is that we are the body that's charged with taking licensure action against teachers who have gone through and been adjudicated that the actions they've taken have been unprofessional or and I think that some of those things start because a teacher's in a position where they feel like they have to be all things to that student. And it's very hard because you have a conversation that rolls right along and then all of a sudden it is in completely forbidden territory and it's happened in 2 seconds. And the teacher's in a place where the way they deal with a particular situation right then is going to define whether they stay in the classroom for the rest of their career. And the people who are the go-to people on that matter are the counselors, the social workers, and the nurses. And it's that is a huge thing. You mentioned, you say go-to person. That's exactly right on the money.
Jen, maybe you've heard here, Jen, a way to describe, take what we've got in Recommendation 4 and verbalize it just like we talked about here, is to determine who are the right people, that being the counselors and the teachers, and how we can help get students when these things come up, well-being come up, they can get them to the right people. I mean, that may be without a lot of discussion here about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. So what I think I'm hearing is that we are largely aligned on what we have here with a couple of refinements. One is the first bullet point around the textbook commission. The only question I would ask there is that the way this is written right now is it is meant to produce a resource, not to be restrictive. So it's meant to produce a list that would be available, but not one that would be a forced choice. And I don't know if that changes people's perspectives on that, or they feel like that's too far down a slippery slope. So we just toss that out there. I think we can, I think a lot of what I've heard is around equipping all of the adults in the building to some degree and equipping them to be able to recognize when they're out of their depth and have them also understand where to send kids next. So I think we can amend that second bullet point to put a finer point on what we're talking about there and add potentially a recommendation around increased number / funding for counselors, nurses, and social workers to be in alignment with the BEP committee and the feedback that we've heard from you all. And then I would ask the last 2 bullet points here in this recommendation, or the last 3, we have funding streams to support high quality research-based well-being initiatives, and that may be one we haven't really talked about here today. I don't know how folks are feeling about that one, but the last 2 also feel aligned to this conversation, which is incentivizing partnerships between education systems and existing mental and behavioral support systems to help communities understand what tools already exist. I think communities could include educators and school communities there per Senator Dolores's push on, making sure that schools are connected to Perkins centers and other resources in the community to help them address issues that are happening at the family level. And then the last piece, incentivizing the expansion of existing high quality mentoring programs to support students' well-being. We've had a lot of conversation around mentoring over the last several months, and that piece is in here as well. So 1, my questions to you would be, does that sound right? And 2, are there any rethoughts around removing the textbook commission piece And any thoughts on that third bullet around research-based well-being initiatives?
I for one believe, look at what we got here, probably less research and more action is needed. So I don't know that we need to charge people off to go do more research. I think we understand the what is and the why of our situation. We need to go act upon the recommendations that's already been approved and what we're coming up with now. That's just my overall arching thoughts.
I don't think we're asking them to do research. I think we're asking them to leverage research. So to be looking for research-based resources and tools, not to go make new ones.
Jen, as I listen to the conversation, it sounds like all of that is accurate based on what you just summarized. And I would agree with the third bullet. I mean, I'm fine keeping it in there if we can incentivize new ways of districts being able to think about well-being, because every district's going to be a little bit different. Every school in each district could probably be a little bit different too, based on the student body. That first bullet, the stakeholders I spoke with were very adamant about having that be done under local conversation. And even to Joey's point, I think that, he reinforced that perspective. The only thing that I think is missing here would be if we choose to, as part of the curriculum conversations for the EPPs, to ensure that they are helping educators understand what it means to help be that support for students.
Yeah, so Tara, the notes that I have going back to that EPP conversation are to add a bullet that's around strengthening the curriculum and educator prep programs for teachers and leaders to ensure that they have knowledge and skills to meet diverse student needs. I think we could just put a comma there and say including students' well-being needs, or both academic and well-being needs, or something like that. Okay.
All right, so what I hear is we're definitely taking out the first bullet and then refining the rest of the bullets per my previous voiceover that I will not repeat.
Yeah, I do have a question, Joy. This might be a question for you. Do you think it makes logical sense for every district to have some sort of plan for supporting students? Certainly we would expect the funding to come in from the state for nurses, counselors, and social workers, fully fund them at least, based on student enrollment. The having the right resources that teachers can have in their hands, taken care of at a local level as opposed to the state level, like how does this first bullet work or not work?
As far as having to submit a plan, an official plan, I may be off, but I don't recall having to submit that. However, I would be surprised if there's any district in Tennessee that doesn't have a plan, because from ACEs to positive behavior supports, there are just so many resources out there that everybody has this as part of school. It's just part of school now. So
how is it?
Sure that anybody checks off. Senator Gresham, sorry.
Joey, how's it paid for?
Local or federal funds, but there's no. I'm not aware of any money coming in at the state level that supports that work.
Well, if it's kind of a common strategy to offer grants for a plan submitted. So if a district would submit a plan that with a budget, then they're, I'm not sure where it would go, the Department of Education or Department of Health or whatever. There would be a grant program. I'm trying to find the words. Establish a grant program to support well-being plans or something like that within school districts. So then a school district would have to go forward and say, this is our plan, and ask for a grant to support it. And it would differ per district, you know, small districts as opposed to large districts, or it could even be by school. But just to point out, for example, in my county with the Carl Perkins Center, the Carl Perkins offers training to all teachers to the here in the county on identifying behaviors that would lead them to want to discuss reporting that with Carl Perkins and bringing that to their attention. So actually, you know, that could be part of a grant program. My bottom line is it could be part of a grant program. That's all. When you talk about incentivizing and providing funding, it could be a grant program rather than part of the BEP, for example.
And I love that, Senator. As a matter of fact, I have a program that I am wanting to implement, and I'm waiting on ESSER 3 money to fund it, because I think that's an excellent idea.
So Jen, that sounds like there's something to add to this one. And then we can, sounds like we're ready to move on to the next section.
I think we are. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly.
Great. Okay, so we are going to spend the next about 25 minutes going through some potential new recommendations. And we're going to go through this almost exactly like we did back in July. What I sent all this to you yesterday. And so what we're going to do on these slides is just go through topic by topic. Again, as a reminder, these are the topics that came up in July. We sent you some new content modules between July and August on these different content areas. And then with some suggested recommendations at the end that kind of came up from research and from talking to all of you. What you see on the slide here are those recommendations broken down by content area. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the yes, maybe, and the no. Those are the data from the survey that you all filled out over the last couple of days. Again, it's just a starting point. You can have a different, certainly have a different opinion today after conversation with your colleagues, but just meant to be a starting place for the conversation. So we'll dive right into student remediation. And this is kind of going back to our conversation in July about how can we kind of push some of the remediation down into the K-12 system so that kids are coming into the post-secondary system a little bit more prepared. So we had 4 recommendations here. The first, to support early interventions and high quality materials and instruction for K-12 students to minimize the need for post-secondary remediation. That had 7 yeses, 2 maybes, and no nos. Enact relevant recommendations currently under consideration related to literacy, well-being, and mentoring. So those are some of the other recommendations that are in the draft report, just kind of reiterating them here, that they are going to address some of the needs that students have and ideally result in kids ending up in post-secondary needing less remediation. And again, 5 yeses, 4 maybes, and no nos on that one. The third is to create an early warning data system and corresponding interventions with 4 yeses, 5 maybes, and no nos, and then develop senior year catch-up programming. 2 yeses, 5 maybes, and 2 nos on that. And so just to note that the green highlights indicate where at least 5 of the 9 commissioners responded yes, and no one selected no. So again, just meant to color code and kind of give you a visual cue as to where folks are aligning, but it's not meant to be binding. So let's talk about these student remediation ones. Are there any reasons to not include the 2 that are green? And or does anyone want to make a case for the other 2 on the student remediation specifically?
I'd like to discuss the create an early warning data system, and I don't know who put that in, or even if I put that in, I don't know. But I'm trying to think of like, what are the triggers? How will a administrator know at what point that it's time for remediation? And so the earlier that we can step in, the better. So maybe that is, a tier 1, 2, or 3, where if a student is in super dire need, then where there's a different level of support that exists for that student versus maybe someone who's a little bit less or a little bit less. And so I think that concept, using the data with corresponding interventions, which technically I think would be the first one there, just because we provide the interventions, the high quality material, doesn't mean it's getting executed. And I think that's a really important piece. We have such dire need for remediation right now, and probably anytime we have any sort of future floods or pandemics, that ensuring that a red flag can be given to the administrator so that they can make a move with the appropriate resources, I think just seems to make sense.
So one thing I think that is important to note here, the legislators put in basically the work that's going on with early literacy right now. For the first time, districts across Tennessee are going to be required to submit first and second grade literacy data. We're having to do, part of the bill was for screeners to be given, and that data to be collected and given to the state. So by nature, that alone, the work that's already taking place is going to help create that early warning data system, because historically, there's not a lot of statewide data on first, second grade, kindergarten, first, second grade, kindergarten not included in this one. But I just wanted you to know that there are data points that are coming.
Your perspectives, Joey, is that fast enough from a remediation standpoint? And I don't know what the state's going to do about it, but I mean, if this is happening at a local level, it's ultimately the local district's responsibility, at least in my pea brain, to say, I've got to help, Johnny with whatever his or his challenges are.
It goes with the read on third grade, on grade level by the end of third grade is what it's all coming together for. So I think that it just gives everything, I think it's more specific. I think that it gives everything a name. And so I just think that work is beginning to be more focused. And I may not have answered your question. You may have to ask it a different way.
That's okay. Glenn, you have a question?
And I may be out of line, Jen, because this is kind of a new topic, but it's around remediation. This came up repeatedly in my conversations with industry and with community and college. Do we track the cost for remediation? And if so, where does it lie? Where does the school pay for that, or what do we know about cost for remediation? Who's the cost causer for this? And if we want the behavior,
Sorry.
I'm really trying to get to the cost cause. It's kind of a business terminology. The cost causer should bear the burden for that. And today it seems to be getting passed down the line, and ultimately it ends up with an employer having to do it, or they fire the employee because they can't write an email or because they can't give a talk. So I think it's an important point around remediation. And do we know what remediation costs us? Anyway, like I said, it's a new topic, Jen, so I don't want to tie the time up today, but I'd like for people to think about that.
Well, Glenn, if I may, I caught holy hell for proposing that the cost of remediation of youngsters who report into community colleges, that the cost of the remediation would be paid by the school district that sent them there.
That's the way it is today?
Sir?
Is that the way so the community college is bearing that cost today then, is that right?
Yes. As I understand it, yes, they are.
Okay. So the community cost, what about the high school? They don't bear that cost yet. That's where they should have picked up the training, right?
And I think that's part of what that first suggestion is kind of trying to get at, and we can certainly revise the language there, but it's like pushing some of the expectation down into the K-12 system for ensuring that they are doing early interventions, that they are using high quality materials, so that kids are going to post-secondary, whether that's a 2-year or 4-year institution, ready for that level of work.
And we're going to put some, not necessarily, we're going to highlight that. That's going to be noted that school ended up with X millions of dollars of remediation. Maybe they ought to do something about it. Yeah.
Actually, I think that the student, or I think the student is the one that has to pay for that remediation at the college. That's not the college that pays it; it's the student.
Well,
That's correct. If I could jump in real quick, that I was waiting for a break. The remediation is explicitly not covered by the state, whether it's state appropriations or financial aid. Financial aid is not allowed to be used for remedial studies. Now, I will say this, that the Board of Regents, the community colleges, have begun to leverage co-remediation rather than specific remedial coursework.
Mm-hmm.
And so the students are able to, in a number of cases, resolve their remedial needs while they're taking an actual course, which is a benefit to the student, but still in terms of a burden of work to do, that's higher. And so just to throw that out there.
And Lou, how is that counted? Is that counted as a student requiring remediation, or does that just kind of get absorbed into the system if they're taking that kind of a course, as you call it, a remediation course?
Right, and I think they transitioned to co-remediation because of largely because of the outcomes-based funding formula, which traditionally, if you remember with the Complete College Tennessee Act, we essentially prohibited the universities from offering remedial studies at all.
Correct.
And in doing so, put it on the community colleges, which at the time were offering courses, remedial coursework.
Courses,
which students had to pay for out of pocket, one off at a time. But because of that, because those courses are outside of any program of study, neither federal or state financial aid would cover it. So the TBR schools started doing co-remedial work, one, for efficiency, but two, because financial aid will pay for a co-remedial course if it's part of a program of study. Same thing for the federal financial aid.
Okay.
Remedial courses, by definition, are outside of it.
Yeah.
Okay, how is that student counted though? Is that student counted as a student in remediation, or just as a student in a course, in a program of study?
Exactly. In a co-remedial course, the student is simply taking the course. There may be some add-ons, but I do not think that they are counted, quote unquote, counted as a remedial student. I've had conversations with some of the folks over at TBR, and this transition has muddied the water on tracking the students, in those categories. So, and that's an important distinction.
There's got to be a way of doing that too, because we'll never know. We'll never know, but that's probably a side issue, but
so
nonetheless, it counts.
Just for purposes of a reminder, the time is 1:33 now. There's a great deal more to cover. So we might need to take things at a faster pace.
Yep. So I think I'm hearing that we want to include those first two that are highlighted green. And then it sounded like there was some consensus around an early warning data system or using some of the data that already exist at the high school level to ensure that kids are getting interventions that they need earlier than post-secondary. Is that right?
I believe you've captured that correctly, Kelly.
Okay, great. Let's move on to computer science then. So 2 recommendations here. If you remember from the module we sent over last year, the Tennessee had a computer science task force that put forth a whole bunch of very specific recommendations related to computer science and related to elevating it within the state. And so there's an opportunity for you all to kind of elevate and promote those recommendations that are already in existence. And then separately, you could recommend that the state track and analyze the computer science course enrollment data to ensure that proportionate participation across student demographics, and then also use those data to inform continuous program improvement. there's a little bit more of a spread in terms of the survey data that we gathered. For each of those, we had 3 folks say yes, 4 say maybe, and 1 say no. Does anyone want to argue strongly, I guess, for these computer science, one or more of these computer science recommendations?
I guess from my perspective, I don't remember what was recommended by the computer science task force. I do think that computer science, coding, technology, however that is defined, should be integrated into the curriculum across the schools.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what I voted on these because I don't know what the computer science task force recommended, and I don't know that's really.
There are a whole bunch of them around making it a requirement and a requirement for all high schools to offer at least 1 course, doing some work in the middle and elementary school to kind of start kids earlier and the coding type things. There are a whole bunch of other ones too.
Well, it just strikes me that, especially if you think about Dr. Bill Fox, who came to talk with us, everything has, we need our students to be able to be ahead of the game when it comes to technology. And this just strikes me as one piece of curriculum that we need in there, as equally as much that we need someone to learn how to read and write and do math. Potentially have civics education and history and foreign language as well.
So it sounds like maybe we need to go back to those task force recommendations and pull out ones that are kind of along those lines of starting to integrate this younger, making sure kids have access to it, and call those out specifically as recommendations that you all are kind of putting your weight behind. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. Unless anyone else has anything to say. Okay, Kelly, we can probably move on.
All right, numeracy instruction and minimal instructional time. A fair amount of alignment here, so hopefully we can get through these pretty quickly. Currently, we have a recommendation related to literacy. There is nothing in the draft yet related to numeracy instruction. So we had a couple here. Creating programs for leaders and teachers to improve math teaching and learning to respond to pandemic-related unmet learning, particularly for underserved populations, and establishing high-quality evidence-based curriculum recommendations and professional development programs specifically for numeracy instruction. Both of those had 7 and 8 yeses, respectively, and then a fewer yeses, a handful of maybes for encouraging districts that are not already using year-round assessments to establish a comprehensive assessment system for numeracy. Do we feel good about including those first 2 green ones? I'm seeing thumbs up, head nodding. Are we okay not including the bottom one, encourage districts not using year-round assessments to establish a comprehensive assessment system? Seeing more head nods. All right, minimum instructional time. Again, a fair amount of agreement here around recommending that the state move to an hours per year minimum to give districts some flexibility over their calendars, with some quality guardrails to ensure that districts are maximizing quality instruction time for students. There's just not a whole lot of evidence for or against hours per year versus a day per year. So some structure around making sure that whatever districts are doing, they're maximizing quality instructional time. Do we feel good about including this one? Great. Moving on. 3 more that had a fair amount of alignment. The first is incubating innovation, creating a process for the state to support locally led innovation, such as a state-led innovation fund. That would be an example. It doesn't have to be the exact thing that the state does. Financial incentives for educators, creating a new state-operated financial incentive program for teachers. There were a couple in place. They've recently been defunded, so this would be creating a new one. And then lastly on this slide, financial aid, calling for a full assessment of the state's financial aid portfolio for alignment with best practices, consistency across programs, and alignment with other state goals and initiatives. Fair amount of alignment here. They're all green. Does anyone have any concerns about including these?
This is Glenn. I would just strongly encourage this, and businesses have a good history here in Tennessee of our incubators, our business accelerators, and since there's a lot of opportunities in the world of education that social entrepreneurship would attract make some attraction. So I strongly encourage this.
And I think we could add to that top one around incubation, around creating a process to support locally led innovation, such as an innovation fund or partnering with the incubators that already exist, something like that.
Right. like your education. You know, I think that's wonderful.
All right. Lastly,
Ellie, can you go back one? I
Sure.
think that second one down is only focused on teachers. I think we need to include all educators, so leaders and teachers.
the financial incentive program for teachers and leaders. Okay.
Yep.
Great. All right, and then the most recent content module we sent you all was on school choice, specifically charter schools and open enrollment. There was less alignment around these, and you'll see the open enrollment one I've kind of flagged as red because there were a considerable number of no's there. But charter schools, so addressing some funding inequities that were noted in the NACS's assessment of Tennessee's charter school law. So things like operational funding and capital and facilities funding is not great for charter schools. So so you all could make some recommendations about improving funding. You could make some recommendations around addressing some oversight and transparency issues that have been noted in assessment of Tennessee's charter school law. Potentially incentivizing high quality operators to open charter schools in communities outside of the state's major cities. They currently only exist in some big cities. So if you want to incentivize them in rural or suburban communities, for example. And then the open enrollment piece, 5 no's on this one, providing transportation or transportation assistance for open enrollment students. So those students who are located living in one district but are attending school in a different district. Based on the data, I don't know that there's super strong alignment here, but does anyone want to make a case for including one or more of these school choice recommendations?
I'll jump in. I know the charters right now exist only in the urban communities, and I do think that there are some challenges in the school operations, and I think that is a challenge for the way they operate, and they are serving the same, at least in Nashville, they're serving the same students as the zone schools are serving as well. I also, having oversight and transparency and being able to ensure that all of our schools are measured from the same quality metrics, I think is really, really important. So the oversight and transparency issues is one thing, but I would, which I think is fine. I think it makes logical sense. I would also say that whatever is done for charters, we should also be doing for our traditional schools as well, and vice versa.
So a concern I have, we have eight areas that we are focusing on, and this hasn't really been part of the work up until our last meeting. It didn't seem like it was much. My concern is that if we go down this road, that it takes away from the other work, because I just think that it deflects some of the other work if we're not really careful where this goes.
You mean school choice generally?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
We have noted there have been funding inequities between our traditional public schools and charter schools. Our charter schools, we have to remember, are public schools. So I would certainly support not only that first item, but the second one as well. The third one, I think the market takes care of that, but the first and second, I would certainly support.
Joey or Nadia, are you comfortable with that?
I hear that, and I do understand, yes.
So including the first two around addressing funding inequities and oversight and transparency, it sounds like for now there's alignment. We may need to kind of talk about it later in terms of how we're framing it to make sure it's not overshadowing some of the other work that's being done at the district level.
But I also think it's important that the points that Commissioner Scarlett brought up about everybody needs to have the same reporting responsibilities, the same expectations. As the funding is the funding, so let's all be measured the same way.
Yeah, and I flipped to the next slide because I'm not sure that this gets at that exactly, but I wanted to put it out there. The last one here, these were kind of other suggestions that came through from our conversations with you all. The last one here is around completing the rollout of the A to F school accountability system that was created kind of prior to the pandemic. It never got fully rolled out. And that would apply to all public schools, district schools, and charter schools alike. So curious, Joey and Tara, if that gets at what you're talking about, or if there's something else that needs to be added.
We've been working for a long time to have the complete rollout of the AF school accountability system, so I would certainly support that recommendation. Are we talking about the other two as well?
Sure.
The item on ongoing funding for ERIC, that entire recommendation seems out of place because the jurisdiction of oversight is to the standing committees, and they're the ones who continue to institutionalize improvements and produce reports. They act as the watchdog, and it's their job to ensure continuous improvement. So the standing committees in both the House and the Senate are indeed the ones who have jurisdiction and oversight over whatever we might recommend. So, and
Hey, Dolores, let me probe you a little bit on that, because it strikes me that if that was actually the case, then this would be a consistent, ongoing innovation. There would be continuous improvement, yet we haven't seen a lot of big drastic changes. So can you help me understand that a little bit more? Because I'm not too sure that I'm seeing that.
I'm afraid we're growing government.
Yeah.
If we have another commission doing another thing, and the standing committees usually, and the standing committees do have jurisdiction for oversight.
So how could we ensure that there was regular continuous improvement and reporting? And I think about the Oreo, the Office of Research and Analytics, or whatever it's called. But I think
yes, in the Comptroller's office.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be like this body, but ensuring that there's regular communications out and assessing. And we've been through a lot over the past year, and it just strikes me that that would be a potentially a good place for this to land if it was something that was ongoing, that would evolve what they were doing. But I'm just trying to think about ways that to ensure that there is there's regular third-party viewpoints that can be shared and innovation is being applied.
You could have, I suppose you could have legislation that would give the ERIC function to OREA.
Yeah.
And that's a comptroller, and they actually work for the legislature. Yep. So that's certainly a possibility. And then you're not growing government, but however, you're adding a function, but you're not creating another commission forever, never, amen. You know?
And I think that was the inspiration behind this, is to ensure that, is there an annual report? Is there something that needs to come out that's ensuring that the recommendations that are set here are moving forward, but also that we are thinking about things from an innovative standpoint while simultaneously supporting all education from the, kindergarten through to career.
So you could have a recommendation that gives the function to OREA to periodically or annually or biannually or whatever, review the ERIC recommendations and what progress the legislature has made, something like that. But OREA would be a good place for it to land.
Yeah, let's think about that a bit. I mean, the entire ability for you all to come together and provide everything that's unvarnished. First of all, we say provide continued ongoing funding. There's no funding at all for ERIC. Every bit of it, when we get a meal or anything like that, that comes out of funds that we have at the State Board of Education. Secondly, I think probably we'd want to talk with the folks at the Office of Research and Education Accountability. And while, you know, the legislative committees certainly have the oversight authority, that's been exercised in different ways at different points in time.
So maybe we put a
But-
pin in this, and this is something that like the year 2 report will come out, you'll have another shot at it in the spring. Maybe this is something we think about kind of as this commission is winding down, whether or not it makes sense to make a recommendation earlier to do that. Does that seem right? Just
That's fine.
Yeah,
We could always, that legislation you could always say that it should come under the state board, Nathan. That'll give you more to do, don't you think?
when we love that. But no, I'll tell you, I mean, one of the
Anyway.
one of the things in this, you know, that led to this commission being created is that it was a one-time thing.
The second question you had, Kelly, was in regards to the A through F, and I think that was a logical accountability model that could be used to apply to all schools, regardless of model or governance structure.
I agree.
I know we are at 10 till the hour now, so I think and we're done. This is actually our last slide. So does it make sense, Tara, for us to send you an email with the notes of the revisions and additions we've captured, and we can shift into voting at this point?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to read this out loud as opposed to me reading it. So we'll start by I'll provide a motion. I'll move to reinstate our meeting and dissolve our workshop. I believe that we're going to have to take a roll call vote. Is that correct, Nathan, for us to dissolve the workshop? Yep. Mr. Griffin, are you still on? And if so, can you take the roll, please?
Okay. All right. Commissioner Burns, Commissioner Dixon, Commissioner Gresham.
Aye.
Commissioner Christopher Jones, Commissioner Yolanda Jones.
Aye.
Commissioner Rothermel.
Aye.
Commissioner Swift.
Aye.
Commissioner Vaughn.
Aye.
Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 6 ayes.
Excellent. We will move forward with our formal meeting. With that, I'm going to ask Kelly Foster to read all of the recommendations in full, and we will take a full vote moving forward. And I will remember after we have this conversation, we'll also talk a little about editing and wordsmithing. So really, we're just looking for the conceptual framework of what we just discussed during workshop. So with Kelly, I'll pass it over to you to review with us, please.
Great. So I will start with the revisions to the existing recommendations. In recommendation 3A, we will remove the raise standards for entry to the profession portion of the bullet point about compensation and salary and focus on increasing salaries only. And we will add a bullet that reads, strengthen curriculum and educator preparation programs for both teachers and leaders to ensure they have the knowledge and skills to meet students' diverse needs, both academic and well-being. In recommendation 3B, we will revise the second bullet point to read, provide technical assistance to districts, in particular rural districts, to establish partnerships with local high-quality educator preparation programs in order to create local GYO, grow your own programs. And we will add a bullet point that reads, incentivize institutes of higher education to work with their partner districts to cultivate new teacher pipeline programs. And we will remove the bullet point around educator preparation program diversity goals. In recommendation 4, we will remove the first bullet about the textbook commission. We will revise the second bullet point to read, provide professional development to equip all adults in a school building to recognize students' well-being needs and know when and where to refer students who need more support. We will add a bullet point to that says fully fund school-based nurses, counselors, and social workers to be in line with BEP committee recommendations. And we will add a bullet point to create a state grant program to support local well-being initiatives. In recommendation 6, add a bullet point that says, evolve all high schools to offer multiple pathways for students, including both a technical pathway through TCATs and a professional pathway through colleges, with some integration to allow students to move among pathways if one isn't a good fit, and evolve funding streams to allow for students to engage in a variety of pathways. And we will add apprenticeships to the second bullet point and spell out acronyms including CLEP and WBL for work-based learning. And in recommendation 7A, we will revise the bullet point about full-time hours to read, expand existing models of on-time completion, in particular moving to full-time enrollment being 15 hours rather than 12, and evolve financial aid to support this shift. And we will incorporate into the existing third bullet point about transfer pathways content to incentivize 4-year institutions to partner with 2-year institutions and TCATs in order to advance transfer pathways. We will add to our existing list of recommendations recommendations around remediation. We're adopting a recommendation to support early interventions and high quality materials and instruction for K-12 students to minimize the need for post-secondary remediation. Adopting a recommendation to enact relevant recommendations currently under consideration related to literacy, well-being, and mentoring. And we will adopt a recommendation to create an early warning data system and corresponding interventions, ensuring integration across existing data systems and equal access and support, including funding for implementation across districts. Related to numeracy, we will adopt a recommendation to create programs for leaders and teachers to improve math teaching and learning to respond to pandemic-related unmet learning, particularly for underserved populations. We will adopt a recommendation to establish high-quality evidence-based curriculum recommendations and professional development programs. Related to minimum instructional time, we will adopt a recommendation to move to an hours per year minimum to give districts flexibility over their calendars, with some quality guardrails to ensure districts maximize quality instructional time for students given the dearth of evidence for or against this. Around incubating innovation, we will adopt a recommendation to create a process for the state to support locally led innovation, such as a state level innovation fund or partnership with existing initiatives. Under financial incentives for educators, we will adopt a recommendation to create new state-operated financial incentive programs for teachers and leaders. Under financial aid, we will adopt a recommendation to call for a full assessment of the state's financial aid portfolio for alignment with best practices, consistency across programs, and alignment with other state goals and initiatives. Related to charter schools, we will adopt a recommendation to address the funding inequities noted in NAPCS's assessment of Tennessee's charter school law, including operational funding and capital and facilities funding. And we will adopt a recommendation to address oversight and transparency issues noted in NAPCS's assessment of Tennessee's charter school law, such as stronger ability for authorizers to intervene and more transparency related to educational service providers. And finally, we will adopt a recommendation to complete the rollout of the A through F school accountability system to enable a quality comparison across all public K-12 schools in Tennessee. That's all.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. I'd like to entertain a motion to accept all the recommendation concepts at this point.
So moved.
This is Glenn. Let me just clarify with Kelly. Kelly, when you say adopt a recommendation, are we going to expand our 8 current recommendations, or are these items going to fit under one of those 8?
Many of them fit under the existing 8. If any of them don't, we could potentially create a 9th or a 10th if we need to, but that'll come through in the full draft of the report.
I had tremendous alignment I've received about the 8 we had, so my hope would be we would fit these under those 8. So that's just a point for you.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you very much. Mr. Griffith, can we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Burns, Commissioner Dixon, Commissioner Gresham,
Aye.
Commissioner Jones, Christopher, Commissioner Yolanda Jones,
Aye.
Commissioner Rothermel,
Aye.
Commissioner Swift, Mr. Vaughn.
Aye.
Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 6 ayes.
Excellent. and we will be able to move forward. That is passed. Let's see what is next. So any discussion before we formalize that? I feel like we just had an hour and a half of that, so I think we should be good, but want to open it up? Okay. I would say this next motion has to do with editing, and I would like to entertain a motion to appoint Commissioner Chisholm Burns and myself to act as non-deliberative report copy editors with the understanding that the creation of the report will be done at the direction of the commission and under the supervision of its support staff, and that the report will be voted on at the opening meeting of this commission. This is similar to the approach that we took last fall with the first report. So we certainly want to offer that, although, you know, I recognize Commissioner Burns is not here, but we would welcome that motion from the commission.
So moved.
That motion.
Yolanda.
I'll second. This is Joey.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Mr. Griffith, would you please roll call? Or call the roll.
Commissioner Burns, Commissioner Dixon, Commissioner Gresham,
Aye.
Commissioner Christopher Jones, Commissioner Yolanda Jones,
Aye.
Commissioner Rothermel,
Aye.
Commissioner Swift,
Aye.
Commissioner Vaughn.
Aye.
Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 6 ayes.
Excellent. I'm assuming there's no discussion, so we will pass that motion. Next, I'd like to pass it over to Dr. Foster to give us a little rundown of recap and next steps.
Yeah, so our immediate next steps, we will, Nathan, I assume you need a copy of what was just adopted so that it can be posted, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, yep, so we'll send that out, so that'll be posted. We'll also send a recap to all of the commissioners early next week, so you all have this for your records, everything that we discussed today, as well as what you all voted on. And over the next couple of weeks, Lynn, Jen, and I will be working on putting together a full draft of the report. We will be in touch with you also next week about a timeline for when you can expect that to review. And we will be scheduling some time to get some feedback on that from you again over the next several weeks on both the report and the addendum. As a reminder, we'll be working on both of those in parallel. So lots of information forthcoming from us, and we will be asking for a fair amount of your time between now and the November meeting as well. So just want to make sure that you're all kind of ready for that. We appreciate it in advance.
Thank you so much. Any final comments or questions from the commission or anyone else on the call?
This is Glenn. It was a very good use of our time. I just want to clarify with Kelly. You're also going to solicit any new input that we have since that didn't get into this report.
Yes. Yep. Any other stakeholder feedback that's still coming in, please continue to pass along to us.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Well, with that, it is 2:02 and we are adjourned. Enjoy your rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a good day.
Thank you.